What if everything you thought of health and wellness suddenly changed due to a hidden breathing problem that you were unaware of that affects every system in your body? Improper breathing habits are often overlooked in medicine. I'm Dr. Jenny from the Hobson Institute, and this is the Breathing Lab. Hello, I am here with Dr. Mariano Rocabado at the Rocabado Institute in Santiago, Chile, Los Dominicos. Dr. Mariano Rocabado is head and neck physical therapy expert. He's a researcher, a writer, even the dean of a university here in Chile. And I'm here with him this January 2019 to interview him for a few questions that I have that you might be interested in. Dr. Rocabado, could you share with us what are the head and neck cranio-mandibular issues that you see mostly in your daily clinic with children?
Well, that's a very interesting question. First of all, because I think we have neglected, in a way, issues that are related to growth and development in pediatrics that are actually seen later on in the future as probably what is incriminating or creating a possible abnormal relationship between the cranium, the mandible, and the cervical spine. Probably what we see the most are airway issues in pediatrics, superior airway obstructions that lead to an abnormal position of the head and the neck. Especially in a lateral view, you can see that they usually adopt the position of posterior rotation of the cranium with a forward position of the head, but with a retracted mandible. So you see retroinclined profiles very often in pediatrics as one of the main issues that we see with airways. The other problem that we see in pediatrics is asymmetries, craniofacial asymmetries related to maybe one orbit high and one corner of the lip high. That is what we call a high-high relationship of asymmetry, which is a typical craniovertebral joint abnormal alignment. That will create in the future changes in how the maxilla relates to the mandible. We see crossbites, severe class 2 cases, many issues in relationship to that at the end up with an abnormal positions of the condyles of the mandible in an abnormal temporal fossa position. So we see the changes of the fossa in a not a balanced position with the condyles of the mandible. And that will create abnormal patterns of growth and development.
Now, what are the issues you see with adults that have head and neck craniomandibular issues?
Well, basically, it's just a continuation of what happens in pediatrics that are not seen early enough, and then in the future, they will relate in static positions of the craniovertebral joints, sometimes side-bended, sometimes side-bended and rotated, and they will continue with the issue of asymmetries of the face. Mandibular deviation, as I said, crossbites, open bites, severe class 2 again, abnormal positions of the fossa of the temporal bone in relationship to the condyle of the mandible, and that eventually will change also the patterns of movements of the mandible. We see deviations, limitations of function, and what's very, very common is to see the progression of intra-joint degeneration, changes of condylar sizes, volume, changes of the surfaces of the condyle. We see osteophytes formation, sclerosis of the condylar bone, and later on it will continue to cause further degeneration and asymmetries. And of course, pain will be part of the problem, craniofacial pain and temporomandibular joint pain.
How important is the position of the tongue for breathing and posture during growth and development?
Well, the rest position of the tongue is probably one of the most common issues in this area. We see a rest position of the tongue that is very low, sometimes it's low and back, and that will create also middle airway issues. The tongue position at rest is also in relationship to rest position of the mandible. So people that doesn't have a normal position of the tongue at rest will tend to have more clenching and probably also more grindings in the teeth. And that overloads the temporomandibular joint that in the future will create probably also a pattern of degeneration and changes of shape.
How important is it to work with a physical therapist that understands the head and neck posture and curves of the spine?
Well, this is something that is mandatory. Orthopedic manual therapists know how to handle synovial temporomandibular joints. And all the joints related to the cranial and the cervical spine are also synovial joints. So it's a common pattern of how you should realign situations at the level of the craniovertebral joints for headaches and facial pain, realign the lower cervical spine cervical curvatures to prevent degeneration of intervertebral disc, and also giving you neck symptoms that could be also related to neck and arm pain. So physical therapists, the responsible in trying to realign this situation to maintain normal rest position and to prevent degenerative process from progressing because of overloading.
How important is it to work with a dentist that understands the proper position of the head and neck with occlusion involved as well?
Well, this is what we call a tricentric relation. We have a craniovertebral alignment to consider, we have a cranio-mandibular alignment to consider, and finally, how the teeth should relate to each other to maintain a stable position of both cranio-mandibular and craniovertebral. So occlusion is extremely important to finish in a stable position, but has to be an occlusion at rest. You can have perfectly aligned teeth, perfectly related teeth, but if the teeth are always constantly overloading and creating increased muscle activity, that is loss of rest position. So the key factor at the end is a normal aligned occlusal relationship.
Lastly, what is your advice for any age to keep a healthy head, neck, and body?
Well, has to be a total body well-being system. It's like doing a training for sports medicine. You need to have all your joints aligned to distribute the forces equally, avoid the overloading with glide, that in the future overloading with glide means wear and tear. So posture is important, but you also have to go with normal glidings of the facet joints, of any joints that is involved on the system, and to maintain the normal rest positions of the groups of muscles that will be related to the different functions. So you need good alignment.
Thank you, Dr. Rocabado. Thank you for allowing me to take this interview and for me to come every January to visit you. You've been an amazing mentor, and I appreciate all that you've taught me. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for doing this interview, because I think it's extremely important that dentists and orthopedic manual therapists work together to be able to maintain happy patients and prevent degeneration and intercept degeneration in pediatric and adolescents.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Breathing Lab with Dr. Jenny.